Every night without asking for your permission, your brain performs one of the strangest things in nature. It builds entire worlds. People you've never met suddenly know your name. Places you've never seen before suddenly feel familiar. The impossible becomes completely normal. You can fly, you can relive your childhood, you can have a conversation with someone who died years ago, and while it's happening, you do not question any of it. And then you wake up, and within minutes, most of it is gone forever. Think about how weird that is. Your brain spends hours creating experiences so vivid that they make your heart race. You laugh, you cry, you feel all these emotions, only for them to be poof, erased, all of them gone before breakfast. At first glance, dreaming seems completely useless. I mean, think about it. If evolution is driven by survival, why would the human brain waste nearly 2 hours every single night producing stories that just go poof instantly? For decades, many scientists believed dreams were nothing more than random electrical activity, a meaningless side effect of a sleeping brain. But the deeper researchers looked, the harder that explanation became to defend. Because dreams aren't unique to humans. Dogs dream, cats dream, heck, even freaking rats dream. Even certain species of birds experience dreamlike activity while they sleep. That raises a very interesting question. If so many different animals evolved to dream, could it really be an accident? Or is dreaming something so important that evolution just refused to get rid of it? The answer begins with a discovery that completely changed how scientists understood sleep. For most of human history, sleep is simple. You close your eyes, your brain rests, you wake up. That's the entire story until one night in the early 1950s. At the University of Chicago, sleep researcher Eugene Osrinsky was studying children using an electroencephalograph, a machine that records electrical activity inside the brain. His goal wasn't studying dreams. In fact, he wasn't even looking for anything unusual. But while watching one of the sleeping children, he noticed something weird. The child's eyes suddenly began moving rapidly beneath closed eyelids. Not slowly, not randomly. They darted back and forth as if the child were watching something invisible. The rest of the body, completely still. The brain, however, was doing the exact opposite. Instead of becoming quieter during sleep, its activity suddenly exploded. It looked almost awake. At first, Osrinsky assumed the equipment was broken or malfunctioned. The recordings didn't make sense. How could someone be deeply asleep while the brain looked so active? So he repeated the same experiment again and again and again, and every time the same mysterious pattern appeared. Rapid eye movements. An intensely active brain, a motionless body. Scientists would eventually give this phrase a simple name, REM sleep, rapid eye movement. The biggest surprise came next. Whenever researchers woke people during REM, something weird happened. Almost every single person reported having a dream, not occasionally, almost every time. Wake somebody outside of REM and many remember nothing. Wake them during it, they describe detailed stories, vivid landscapes, emotional conversations, impossible events, and memories that felt more real than reality itself. For the first time in history, scientists have discovered and really found a direct connection between dreams and the specific state of the brain. But this discovery created a very big mystery. During REM sleep, the brain burns nearly as much energy as it does while you're fully awake. And think about that for a second. The human brain is incredibly expensive to run. Although it makes up only about 2% of your body weight, it consumes roughly 20% of your daily energy. Evolution does not like wasting energy. If something burns that much fuel, it usually has an important purpose. So why would your brain almost become fully active while you're unconscious? Why spend hours every night creating imaginary worlds, experiences, instead of simply just shutting down? For years, nobody had a satisfying answer. Some researchers argued dreams were simply mental noise. Others believed they were meaningless leftovers from the day's events. But then scientists made a discovery so disturbing that it changed the entire conversation. They stopped asking what happens when people fall asleep. Instead, they asked a very different question. What happens if the brain is allowed to sleep, but never allowed to dream? Very simple answer. Keep people awake, right? It's a simple answer to that question. It's an obvious way, right? But that wouldn't work if somebody's deprived of sleep entirely. Almost every system in the body begins to fail. Memory declines, reaction time slows, the immune system weakens. Eventually, the effects become impossible to separate from the effects of losing dreams themselves. Researchers needed something much more precise. They needed people to sleep normally while preventing only one specific part of sleep, REM. They designed an experiment that sounds almost cruel. Volunteers were allowed to fall asleep as usual. Throughout the night, scientists monitored the brain activity using EEG machines. The moment the brain entered REM sleep, the stage most strongly associated with dreaming, they gently woke up the participants. Not for long, just enough to interrupt the dream, and then allowed them to fall asleep again. This cycle repeated over and over and over again, sometimes dozens of times. In a single night, the participants still spent hours asleep, but they almost never reached sustained dreaming. Now, at first, nothing seemed different. They could hold conversations, walk normally, solve basic problems, But only after a few days, subtle changes began to appear. People became unusually irritable. Tiny inconveniences suddenly felt overwhelming. Minor disagreements turned into huge emotional arguments. Concentrating became harder. Their memory became less reliable. Many described a strange feeling they couldn't explain. It was as if their brain had become cluttered. Researchers expected tiredness. What they did not expect was emotional instability. It was almost as though the brain was simply just wasn't resting during dreams. It was organizing itself. Modern neuroscience now supports the idea. While you're dreaming, your brain doesn't just replay memories like a movie. It edits them. Experiences from the day are sorted, strengthened, weakened, or connected to older memories in ways you were never consciously aware of. Imagine finishing a 1,000-piece puzzle. When you're awake, you're constantly adding new pieces. Emails, conversations, embarrassing moments, arguments, things you've learned, things you forgot, things you regret. Your brain keeps collecting information faster than it can organize it, and dreaming appears to be the moment when the sorting begins. Some memories are saved, some are discarded, and connections are formed between ideas that previously seemed unrelated. This may explain why people sometimes wake up with solutions to problems they did not solve or couldn't solve the night before. The answer did not magically appear. The brain kept working while they were asleep. History is filled with stories that sound almost fictional. In 1865, German chemist August Kekulé had spent years trying to understand the structure of benzene, one of chemistry's greatest mysteries. Nothing worked. Then one evening, exhausted from another failed attempt, he drifted to sleep. He later described dreaming of a snake swallowing its own tail, and when he woke up, the image suddenly made sense. The benzene molecule wasn't a straight chain, it was a ring. That single insight transformed organic chemistry. Whether every detail of the story happened exactly as Kekulé remembered has been debated by historians, but the larger pattern is difficult to ignore. Again and again, important ideas seem to appear shortly after sleep, not because dreams predict the future, but because the sleeping brain keeps making connections long after your conscious mind gives up. And then researchers discover something strange. Dreams don't simply replay happy memories. In fact, many dreams are surprisingly negative. People dream about being chased, falling, getting lost, missing an important exam, losing someone they love, standing in front of a crowd completely unprepared. Why? If dreams are helping the brain, why are so many of them stressful? At first, none of this made sense, until evolutionary psychologists proposed a fascinating possibility. What if your brain isn't entertaining you while you sleep? What if it's training you? And according to what's known as the threat simulation theory, dreams act like virtual reality for survival. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors faced dangers that no longer exist for most of us. Predators, violence, starvation, natural disasters. Your brain cannot afford to wait until a real emergency happened to learn how to respond. So it practiced night after night inside a world where failure costs nothing. And if that's true, then dreams aren't random stories at all. They're rehearsals, safe simulations created by one of the most complex organs in the universe. And if your brain spends every night preparing you for dangers that may never come, it raises another mystery. Why do we forget almost all of it the moment we wake up? If dreams are really that important, you'd expect us to remember every single one. But the opposite happens. Within 5 minutes of waking up, most dreams, you forget them. And after 10 minutes, researchers estimate that most people have forgotten the vast majority of what they experienced. It's one of the weirdest contradictions in human biology. Your brain spends nearly 2 hours creating a detailed experience, and then just poofs it, immediately erases it. Why? The answer may lie in what your brain is actively trying to preserve. Many neuroscientists now believe the goal of dreaming isn't to save the story, it's to save the lesson. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. Years later, you probably can't remember every practice session, you can't remember every turn, every fall, every correction, but your brain kept what mattered. The skill remained. Dreams may work in a surprisingly similar way. The characters disappear, the places disappear, even the conversations disappear. But the emotional processing, the memory consolidation, the hidden connections between ideas, those remain. It's almost as if the dream itself is disposable. What matters is that your brain quietly changes while you're inside it. Perhaps that's why dreams feel so bizarre. Your brain isn't telling you a perfect story. It's trying to connect pieces of information that were never connected before. Like a childhood memory, a conversation from yesterday, a fear you've carried for years, a face you passed on the street for 2 seconds. During the day, those pieces seem unrelated, and during sleep, the brain treats them like puzzle pieces waiting to be rearranged. Sometimes the result feels profound, and sometimes it feels stupid, absurd. But underneath the strange images, an enormous amount of invisible work may be taking place. And then there's another mystery. You ever notice that time behaves strangely in dreams? Conversation lasting only seconds feels like an hour. A dream can jump from one place to another and another without explanation, and yet while you're dreaming, totally normal. You are not bothered by any of it. That's because parts of the brain responsible for logic and critical thinking become less active during REM sleep, while emotional and visual regions become far more active. In other words, your brain just stops asking, does this make sense? And starts asking, how does this feel? The shift may explain why dreams can leave such a powerful emotional impression, even when they make absolutely no logical sense. A nightmare isn't frightening because it's realistic. It's frightening because your emotional brain experiences it as if it was real in that moment. And here's something even more fascinating. As artificial intelligence becomes more advanced, neuroscientists have started comparing dreams to something surprisingly familiar. When AI models are trained, they don't simply memorize information. They repeatedly process enormous amounts of data, strengthening useful patterns while reducing unnecessary ones. Your sleeping brain seems to do something remarkably similar. Every night, it reviews experiences, strengthens important neural connections, weakens others, and searches for patterns you never consciously notice. Like in a sense, your brain is retraining itself while you sleep. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough that by morning you're slightly different than you were the night before. A little better at recognizing faces, a little better at recalling information, a little better at understanding emotions, all without realizing it happened. Which brings us to the original question. Why does your brain force you to dream? The answer, or honest answer, is that science still doesn't quite know with complete certainty. Dreams remain one of neuroscience's greatest mysteries. But after decades of research, one thing has become increasingly clear. Dreaming is almost certainly not a meaningless accident. It's far too common, and it's far too complex, and it's far too expensive for evolution to preserve without a reason. Every night you're completely unconscious, billions of neurons fire in carefully coordinated patterns. Memories are reorganized, emotions are processed, ideas are connected, problems are quietly worked on in the background. And somewhere inside all that activity, your brain creates a story that exists only once. A private world that no one else will see, and by tomorrow you'll probably remember none of it. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Some of the most important work your brain will ever do happens while your eyes are closed. Your body is still and your conscious mind has completely disappeared. So tonight when you fall asleep and another impossible world happens and begins to unfold, remember this. You're not dreaming because your brain's asleep. You're dreaming because, in many ways, it's still working.